The sky over the Atlantic looked like glass when the first hull slipped through it without a ripple. Airline pilots reported a shimmer. Beachgoers shaded their eyes. Satellites blinked and rebooted as if embarrassed to admit they had missed an arrival the size of a mountain. By the time the world understood, the ships were already stationary, hanging like patient punctuation marks over New York, Lagos, Mumbai, Rio, and 20 other cities that had learned, through centuries, to take a deep breath before history changed. Dr. Maya Reyes stood in a NASA conference room that had been a cafeteria yesterday. Her coffee had the emergency taste of burnt optimism. On the screen was a close-up of the craft above New York. No seams, no vents, only a pearlescent skin that flowed as if remembering wind. No exhaust, no heat plume, no mass ejection, she said, mostly to keep her thoughts from spiraling. If they have inertia mitigation, our physics lectures just became museum pieces. General Henry Abrams, shoulders like a filing cabinet, did not smile. Speak in English, doctor. They fall without falling, Maya translated. Gravity is a suggestion. The screens across the room changed as one. A figure appeared, tall ash-silver with structures along the jaw that flexed like the gills of a patient creature. The voice emerged in flawless American English, then Spanish, then Mandarin, then a chorus of languages braided into comprehension. "We are the Halcyon Assembly," it said. "Stewards of 12 civilizations and keepers of equilibrium. We greet you, children of Sol. We come offering friendship, knowledge, and protection as you enter the wider sea." A gentle word, protection, but it stuck in Maya's ear like a splinter. She had spent a career listening for tone. In linguistics, you learn that every promise has a grammar. The Assembly's broadcast ran for 8 minutes. Clean energy that would end hunger for fuel. Medical lattices to arrest cancers before they knew themselves, a mentorship that would prevent the accidents of youth. They would establish contact houses in each host city. Leaders were invited to meet. "We ask only," the envoy said, "that you accept guidance, to walk the first miles of the Great Road with a hand to steady you." "Protected member," Maya murmured. A phrase with a leash. Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Cole, U.S. Space Force, watched from the Pentagon's underground, where the air smelled like recirculated secrets. He zoomed the alien image until the pixels protested. No insignia, no rank markings, no ego on the fabric, if it was fabric at all. The militaries of the world synchronized in their uncertainty. Standing orders: don't shoot, don't panic, don't prey on camera. Within hours, smaller vessels peeled away from the mother hulls and came down like silent rain. Central Park sprouted a building that looked like a droplet deciding not to fall. "We request the presence of your builders and teachers," the envoy repeated, "and of those entrusted with your safety." Invitations, but typed in the font of inevitability. Maya joined the delegation to New York's contact house. The wall opened not by retracting, but by changing its mind. Inside, the air had the crispness of a hospital that had forgiven everyone who died there. 3 Halcyon representatives glided forward. The one in front inclined its head with the exact tilt of a human diplomat who had practiced empathy. "Dr. Reyes," it said, "we have admired your work tracing hydrogen line anomalies. It is a joy to greet a mind accustomed to listening." "You've been reading our journals," Maya said. "And your public networks," the envoy replied. "We watch that which is offered." "It's a big offer," General Abrams said, voice even. "An internship with gods." The envoy's jawgills flexed. "Stewards, not gods. We remember when we were new. Guidance spared us centuries of unnecessary pain." "Who decides which pain is necessary?" Meyer asked. "Experience," the envoy said softly, "and love for those who come after." The negotiations were candy-sweet and stainless. Gift devices appeared on tables with disclaimers that sounded like lullabies. Demonstration kits, an inertia lattice the size of a suitcase that let a stone hover like faith. A boundary veil that dissipated kinetic impacts. A power cell that sipped vacuum and hummed in a key no human instrument could tune. "Elementary," the envoy called them. "Child safe." Maya ran a fingertip along the lattice's frame. It was cool, but the air above it trembled as if remembering a fall it had not quite completed. The linguist in her catalogued metaphors: hands, guardians, safety rails. The citizen in her remembered lessons: the homestead, the frontier, the long national argument about the price of help. Benjamin Franklin's old caution rattled around the room as if it had a key card: those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety. On day 3, the assembly hosted their first seminars, where their technicians explained the principles suitable for introductory minds. Day 4, American tinkerers, garage savants, national lab physicists, defense engineers who read DIY forums at midnight, had their hands on the toys. Day 5, a New York City electrician named Rosa Alvarez sent a grainy video to a private Slack. She'd wired the boundary veil wrong and accidentally made a shop broom pass through a cinder block like a rumor. The broom left the other side colder than ice. Maya watched the clip twice, then a third time, feeling a click in the mental lock that had kept her worry organized. The assembly had offered a safety fence. Americans had found the gate, the hinge, and the bolt within 48 hours, not because they were reckless, but because a nation raised on tinkering understands that every gift is also a question. That night she walked home through a city that looked up more than usual. Under the alien ship, the skyline had the posture of a parade at rest. On her building's stoop, a teenager practiced a speech to no one. "We accept," he said to the air, "but as equals." He stopped, cheeks flushing, and grinned at Meyer as if to apologize for having a dream in public. She thought of the American habit of getting lost and drawing a map afterward, of the Constitution's strange bet that power best behaves when split, of the rhythms of a country that had learned to mold fear into jokes, then into tools, then sometimes into better laws. "Guidance," she said aloud, surprising herself with the tenderness in her voice. "We already have a word for that. It's consent." In the contact house, the Halcyon envoy drafted reports in a script like clean water. Humans exhibit high neural plasticity, cultural heterogeneity, and a tool-weapon gradient near one. It wrote to an assembly council light years away. Recommend mentorship at arm's length. Recommend guardrails. Recommend patience. On the 7th day, while the assembly prepared more lectures on safe applications, the Bronx lit up with a midnight cheer. A community college lab had made the lattice sing a different note. The stone didn't hover now. It leapt and hung at a new angle, as if gravity had been asked a favor and, against precedent, had said fine, but only this once. Meyer exhaled, a prayer or a warning, she couldn't tell. The country of her childhood had once transformed scrap steel into liberty ships, cornfields into runways, mistakes into movements. It had also, she knew, built a bomb in the desert and called it necessary pain. The question, as always, would not be whether Americans could, but what they ought. Outside, the alien ship kept its patient station like a teacher waiting for a class to quiet down. New York did not quiet down. It began, as it always had, to build. Part 2, they called it the Lighthouse Group because someone had to name the Slack channel, and Maya refused to let it be Project Yeet. 10 institutions at first: Caltech, MIT, Sandia, a Detroit battery startup whose CTO swore in poetry, a Navy lab in Maryland with more whiteboards than chairs. Then 50. Then 100 as professors forwarded emails with subject lines that sounded like dares. Boundary veil, reverse bias, lattice cold front anomaly, power cell hysteresis wink. The Halcyon seminars continued, crisp and careful. Their technicians showed how the inertia lattice could steady cargo cranes in a storm, how the boundary veil could cradle traffic during a collision. American engineers nodded dutifully and after hours asked impolite questions. What if the veil's phase could be asymmetrical along a plane? What if the lattice's nodes could be tuned to create gradients, not platforms? "Why would you?" a Halcyon instructor asked, not rudely, genuinely unable to imagine the utility of bending a safety rail into a catapult. Because human imagination is a pyromaniac, Maya thought. It follows the smell of heat. In Albuquerque, Dr. Omar Patel, who wore cowboy boots with his suits and taught graduate electromagnetism by drawing cartoons of stubborn magnets, watched his postdoc nudge a dial a millimeter past the manual. The air above the lattice grew glassy. "Record everything," he said, and the stone they'd been hovering began to slide uphill, offended at the betrayal of downhill logic. "Conservation," the postdoc asked, half joke, half prayer. "Energy's cheap if you can invoice the vacuum," Patel said, and in the pause that followed he felt something borderless unfold in his chest. Inertia was no longer a wall. It was a contract to be renegotiated. The Lighthouse group agreed, in a midnight call that hopped time zones like a flat stone, to say less and share more. They wrote the kind of memo that knew it would one day be quoted in congressional hearings. "We will not militarize. We will explore principles. We will publish when safe. We will coordinate with elected oversight." Then they created a second memo with a shorter distribution list. "We will be ready if someone else militarizes first." "You're threading a needle between curiosity and sin," Maya told them, standing at a whiteboard where someone had sketched a lattice like a harp. "Every tool we've ever made sang two songs. One built a bridge, the other took a life. The difference was governance." "Governance is slow," Aaron Cole said from a secure line in Colorado. "Missiles are fast." He had been placed in a liaison role that sounded friendly and meant he slept in his office. The boundary veil looked to defense eyes like a way to keep pilots alive and ships intact. The lattice looked like a way to make aircraft leap, to solve the problem that had dogged every dogfight since Kitty Hawk: turn radius. The Space Force ran simulations as if apologizing to Newton for what was coming. Every model said the same thing. If you can decouple mass from momentum even a little, the geometry of combat rewrites itself. Aaron knew the cautionary tales. His mother, a civics teacher, had kept a poster of the Bill of Rights over the dining table and a dog-eared copy of Hiroshima in the hallway. He also had students at the academy who trusted him to bring them home if the sky turned ugly. "Our oath is to the Constitution," he told Maya. "That includes the part about providing for the common defense." "It also includes promoting the general welfare," Maya said. "We can't do one with a blind eye to the other." "We won't," he promised. He penciled in a margin note in his own mind. Don't let promise become alibi. The Halcyon envoy, who had introduced itself as Prefect Thalen, visited the Lighthouse lab in Austin to watch a public demonstration. Journalists saw the safe version, a crate hovering serenely while a forklift did ballet. Thalen applauded politely. "Your adaptability is worthy," it said. "We would have been spared grief had we been so swift once." "Who mentored you?" Meyer asked during the coffee break. Thalen's jaw-gills fluttered, a halcyon equivalent of a smile. "We had the Aerith for a time. They believed order was mercy. We learned much." "Do you still believe that?" "We believe balance prevents fires," Thalen said. "You have a species talent for friction." "Friction polishes edges," Omar Patel said, and Thalen regarded him with an expression that could have been worry. Past midnight, the Lighthouse group tried a boundary veil inversion with a test plate of composite armor. Instead of repelling force, the veil redirected it along a razor-thin corridor. The plate did not crack. The cinder block behind it opened like a door. Silence washed the lab. The technician turned to Maya with the small, private awe of a parent hearing a first word. "We didn't add energy," she said. "We told it where to go." "Engineering is ethics with math," Maya said softly, "because direction is destiny." On the 6th week, a City Works crew in Queens installed veil panels in a bridge as part of a seismic resilience pilot. The mayor cut a ribbon. Nobody mentioned the pressure focusing mode quietly welded into the truss, or the fact that the Department of Transportation had become very interested in firing arcs. In a classroom in Atlanta, a teacher used the Halcyon power cell to run a whole day of lights, lab tables, and microwaves, then had her students vote on which community organization got to use the cell after school. A civics lesson smuggled into a physics day. "Government is a tool," she said, "and like any tool it can build or break. It works when we look at it. The Lighthouse Group published its first set of principles online in plain language. We do not accept protection without consent. We will not surrender design sovereignty. All applications must pass a public interest test. The post was shared 6 million times, then attacked, praised, misquoted, translated, and taped to refrigerators. There were protests against alien paternalism that looked like music festivals and counter-protests that looked like church. Thalen sent a message to the Assembly Council. Humans demonstrate uncommonly rapid lateral reasoning. They ask what else as default. They have fused boundary veil with railgun prototypes rumored. Advise calibration, advise restraint. The council replied in cool harmonics, steady their hands. Their history is a ledger of fires. Maya spent an evening on her roof with a borrowed guitar, the city humming its sleepless lullaby. A drone passed overhead, civilian, its lights blinking like a kind animal. She thought of Jefferson riding under candlelight, of Douglas speaking thunder into law, of a moonshot that was more than a flag. History here was a long argument with itself. A country promising to form a more perfect union and then imperfectly trying again. Guidance is not wrong, she wanted to tell Thalen. It's just not yours to impose. The next morning, an assembly vessel over the Pacific fired a quiet beam into the ocean to demonstrate a weather-calming technology. Fishermen watched the water smooth as if a great hand had pressed it. Onshore, a lighthouse keeper whose great-grandfather had lost friends to calm seas that hit a rip current shook his head. "You don't fix a storm by forgetting wind," he said to the gulls. "You fix it by teaching sailors." By month 2, 3 truths were clear. The Halcyon were sincerely convinced of their kindness. Humans were sincerely incapable of leaving any tool unexplored. And the line between a lesson and a leash was thin enough to cut skin. The Lighthouse Group voted. An old habit draped over a new horizon, and codified a rule that made every engineer in the room feel both proud and a little ill. Assume dual use, design for accountability, prepare for misuse by someone less accountable than you. Aaron read the memo and began transferring a squadron to a base so quiet it didn't appear on Google Earth. He called the program Sky School because soldiers prefer to learn before they are examined. He prayed in the secular way of people who carry heavy keys that learning would be enough. High above, Prefect Thalen watched the blue-white planet in its patient ellipse and sent one more message home. It was the kind of sentence that history books eventually underline. Recommendation revised, mentorship insufficient. Consider quarantine. Containment protocols had boring names in the Halcyon doctrine because boring words make hard choices feel like paperwork. Operation Gentle Harbor looked efficient on the holodeable. Strike command nodes from orbit with non-kinetic beams. Erase launch facilities, disable satellites, take down grids, land small teams to run the switches. It had worked before. Civilizations praised the stewards later, after the crawling hurt had been traded for a walk. Thalen argued for warning. They keep their promises better when asked for consent, it said. It is a strange law, but it is theirs. The council, light years and centuries of policy away, sang a different chord. Fires spread, quench. Aaron Cole woke to a sentence no officer enjoys. "Sir, you need to be underground 10 minutes ago." He reached the command center as screens turned into snow, recovered into new maps, and bloomed with the blue icons of things that burned without flame. Vandenberg, Offutt, Plesetsk, Jiuquin, glow marks where infrastructure used to be. The Pentagon lost its argument with physics. The lights in the Situation Room flickered, then steadied on generator breath. "They did it quiet," Aaron said through his teeth. "They think quiet is mercy." In Lagos, the contact house opened its walls and lowered stretchers as if the building had trained for triage. In Queens, the seismic resilience panels, blessed the cynical engineer who had blessed them otherwise, swung into defense posture and turned a beam into a ribbon that bent around a school. The ribbon cut a truck in half. Nobody inside the school knew they had been a footnote in a battle plan. Maya ran to the Austin lab and slid to a stop. Omar Patel was already at the console that no Halcyon manual mentioned. "Do we cross the line?" he asked, his voice both steady and raw. "We already drew it," she said. "We might as well walk where we promised to stand." The Lighthouse Group had a protocol with a name they hated, Phoenix. It was not a weapon, they told themselves, any more than a fire extinguisher is a weapon. It was a networked policy, city-scale boundary veils that would bend incoming energy into uninhabited corridors pre-cleared by GIS data. Lattice ramps that could turn ambulances into particles of mercy. Power cells ganged into microgrids that would refuse to die. The system ignited. There are kinds of light the human eye learns to trust. This was one. A Halcyon spearship over Nevada felt the weirdest tap, like arrogance meeting a lesson. Its beam should have slipped into a bunker and become a rumor. Instead, it flowed like water poured onto a prayer and ran off into a canyon, vaporizing geology that had been practicing stillness since dinosaurs knew weather. On board, the weapons officer stared at the readout. "They are redirecting us." "Redirecting?" Thalen repeated. It tasted the consonants. A human verb. Sky School scrambled. The squadron's fighters were ugly with jury-rigged lattice veins and veils in a configuration that made aerodynamicists mutter in their sleep. Pilots who had practiced skepticism their whole careers felt the stick go light, as if the air had decided to be a co-pilot. The first turn bled no speed. The second turn made a new definition of radius. When a spearship sent a dart of concentrated pressure toward the runway, the canopy above it wrinkled space just enough to send the dart into a field the Air Force had irrigated but never expected to boil. Aaron's ear filled with voices. Shiva 1 airborne, copy redirect, crash truck rolling, that was not possible, correction is possible. He closed his eyes for a guilty second and let pride have a heartbeat. The kids could fly. The machines could learn. The Assembly Council's playbook had a paragraph for unexpected resistance. It recommended patience and escalation in that order. Patience lasted 6 minutes. Escalation arrived as a grid of microbursts designed to disassemble electronics with tenderness. The veils remained stubborn, and the microgrids rewired themselves like an organism that had discovered redundancy as a religion. Maya watched the model of Austin blink as the system voted with itself. Blocks blacked out by design to push power toward hospitals. Intersections retimed to create ambulance rivers. In a church basement where a civics class had met every Wednesday to read Federalist papers aloud, teenagers hushed children and stacked water. "We don't make heroes out of disasters," their teacher said. "We make neighbors." Thalen's second-in-command, a tactician who trusted numbers the way some people trust horoscopes, drew a new map in sorrow. "We need to cut out fabrication nodes," they said. "The cities are not only defended, they are manufacturing countermeasures in real time." "Factories?" Thalen asked. "Everywhere," the tactician said. They turned their city into a ship. Over the Pacific, a Halcyon cruiser met an American vessel that did not appear on any registry. It rose from under waves that pretended indifference, shed water like a dog deciding to be a wolf, and accelerated with the casual cruelty of new math. Its hull bore no flag, only a painted phrase, consent, in a stencil the size of a promise. The cruiser fired the kind of shot that normally ended conversations. The American vessel bent, not away but aside, in a way that made the ocean gasp. The beam stitched a line of steam to nowhere. Then the vessel replied with a veil set to a geometry nobody in Halcyon doctrine had written down. The cruiser's shields thought about childhood and failed. Thalen received the casualty list and did something stewards do not schedule. It grieved. "We did not warn them," it told itself, a sentence like a mirror. The council's reply came cold. They warned themselves. In the White House bunker, the president asked a question simple as breath. "Can we survive?" Aaron, patched through past layers of people who say the same thing more politely, answered with an American kind of honesty that balances fear and dare. "Yes, ma'am, and we can do more than that. We can teach." "Teach who?" "Whoever aimed at us," Aaron said, "and whoever is watching." Maya drafted a message the Lighthouse group would pin to the world after someone smarter than her added commas. We do not accept guardianship without consent. We will share what we learn after we can guarantee it cannot be abused to take away agency. We ask for a halt and a conversation in the light. The Halcyon net registered the transmission. Half the council read it as a threat. The other half read it as a law. In that indecision crouched the oldest human ally, time. And in Time's narrow shelter, 2 experiments passed their last tests. One in a converted Detroit plant where welders who had lost auto jobs found new seams along a hull designed by poets and simulations. One in a desert hangar where Sky School's wildest airframe hungering for sky shook itself awake. At dawn over Mojave, a shape lifted that did not quite belong to air. It carried a lattice like a spine and a veil like a conscience. The pilot, call sign Keeper, laughed once and then remembered solemnity. If we meet them up there, she said to the ground, remind me I promised to come back. Copy, Aaron said. Remember you promised to come back. She went, climbing past the part of the blue that most planes accept as enough. It is one thing to write an equation about momentum. It is another to sit inside a machine that refuses to acknowledge it. Keeper's craft fused the Halcyon lattice with American stubbornness and 1,000 small choices made by people who would never get parades. In the thin air, she angled a vane and felt the aircraft slide sideways as if the sky had turned into a slope and she was in possession of new feet. The Halcyon interceptor ahead of her flew with devastating grace, every turn a page from a book of rules perfected over centuries. Keeper broke the spine of that book. She dove toward a slice of air too thin for comfort, bled speed that never arrived, and let the veil nibble at drag until the nose came around with a feline malice. The interceptor overshot, surprised not by speed but by disobedience. Keeper touched the trigger. The beam that left her craft was not heat, as heat is normally confessed, but pressure braided into a line that remembered the cinder block. The interceptor's shield, tuned to fairness and disallowing harm, tried to distribute the blow. The veil suggested a different arithmetic. The blow obeyed. The interceptor opened along a seam that had never existed until it did. Contact down, Keeper said, and in her voice lived 300 years of pilots who had learned grief and restraint. No secondary explosion, they ejected. Pick them up, Aaron said. We don't win by letting people drown. Coast Guard cutters that had been briefed on rescue, not war, adjusted courses. A pararescue jumper leapt into water and found himself widening a strap across a Halcyon chest designed for different gravity. Breathe, he said. In, out. Same song where you're from. The alien's jaw gills flexed. It breathed. A rule rewrote itself. Enemies were also patients. Over Manhattan, the Veil network performed a symphony. Beams bent into dead alleys mapped during zoning fights. A hospital wing that should have darkened during a grid cut glowed on, powered by a constellation of cells mounted last week by high schoolers who had called the project Light Brigade, because they were too young to be haunted by poems. In a basement synagogue, a rabbi and an imam co-signed a supply ledger. Neighbor is a verb, the rabbi said. Amen, the imam replied. Maya stood before a press camera because someone had to tell the story without making it about vengeance. She explained once, twice, a third time, that the boundary veil could turn energy aside, that the lattice could forgive inertia, that consent was not a slogan but an operating parameter. She quoted Frederick Douglass on power conceding nothing and Brandeis on sunlight as disinfectant. She quoted, too, from the Halcyon seminars with credit. Balance prevents fires. We agree, she said. Balance requires both hands on the scale. Thalen watched the broadcast and felt something old, recognition. The assembly had once sung a similar song before the Aerith made their storms calm. We forgot a lesson, Thalen said to the tactician. That guidance becomes a chain when offered with fear. Fear is not irrational, the tactician replied, watching ship icons blink out. They are dangerous. All the worthy minds we've met were, Thalen said. In the Detroit plant, the vessel Consent slid down rails and let the lake hold it. Its captain, a woman who had worked 3 jobs and still coached Little League, stood on the bridge and recited out loud the first line of the oath she had sworn. "I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic." She looked at the alien ship ahead and added a quiet coda. "And I will extend the defense of Consent to those who don't yet know why it matters." Consent didn't fire to kill, it fired to move. Veil corridors pushed beams into lakes, deserts, empty sky. When it had to cut, it cut with surgical misery. Alien crews radioed home with reports that sounded like fables. They were being defeated by a people who refused to fight the way everyone else did. On a halcyon bridge, an officer raised the hard question. "Prefect, if we lose the orbital net, the Council will demand escalation." "Beyond Gentle Harbor?" Thalen asked, knowing the file names like the titles of books it had hoped never to open. "Silent rebuke," the officer said. "Atmospheric perturbation, a freeze strong enough to stall industry without mass death." Thalen pictured the planet's rivers halted like stopped clocks, the factories silent, the hospitals hungry for warmth. "We are stewards," it said, but the word tasted like someone else's mouth. In Washington, cabinet secretaries argued over nouns while the president listened. "We can hit their carrier in lunar shadow," a briefer said. "Minimal collateral, demonstration." "Demonstrations are for science fairs," the president said, "are not announcing a new empire." "Then what are we announcing?" another asked. "That we intend to live as equals," Maya said, invited into the room because the moment required someone who could translate alarm into ethics. "We'll accept trade, we'll sit in councils, we won't be a ward." Aaron added, "And we'll rescue their pilots, that matters." "Why?" a skeptic asked. "Because we're trying to prove a principle to the galaxy," Aaron said. "Not just a point." Sky School's second flight ascended with a payload nobody outside a very small circle knew. A beacon that would, if it worked, write a sentence in the magnetic language halcyon ships used to gossip with each other. The sentence had 3 clauses. "We can reach you. We will not blind you. We require you to stop." Keeper delivered the beacon into an orbital slot like a coin slipped into a narrative. Halcyon vessels shivered as the message threaded their nerves. A dozen captains turned their guns fractionally aside. Not surrender, not yet, but a pause. In pauses, treaties grow. Thalen requested, again, permission to speak to the human leader without intermediaries. The council hesitated in harmonics. Consent did a thing nobody had modeled. It transmitted a route to a parley that favored neither side and both. Open water, cameras, medics, translators, kids from a civics class lining the shore with homemade signs. "Talk louder. We're listening." On the deck, Maya faced Thalen across a table that had probably been a picnic table yesterday. The wind decided to behave. "You tried to help us by making choices for us," she said. "We answered by showing you a version of help that doesn't require obedience." "We feared your speed," Thalen said. "It is without precedent." "Our speed is a symptom," Maya said. "The cause is our habit. We argue, we tinker. We make laws to restrain our worst selves, and we teach our children to ask why until the adults get better. We burn. Sometimes we burn the wrong things, but we also rebuild." "Your rebuilds leave long shadows," Thalen said. "We studied your wars." "And our reformers," Maya said, gentler than the argument might have required. "Don't forget them when you footnote us." Cameras recorded not a surrender, not a victory parade, but 2 representatives writing grammar into the future. Thalen offered an arm in the halcyon way. Maya touched it in the human way. "Consent," she said. "Say it." "Consent," Thalen repeated. The jawgills flexed like a smile learning a new muscle. From orbit, the council watched their doctrine bend and did not yet call it broken. On message boards and in kitchens, Americans argued about cost and kindness and whether you can teach a principle with a beam of light. In classrooms, teachers wrote civics in capital letters and underneath it engineering, and between them drew the equal sign their students would inherit. That evening, Keeper flew a patrol that felt less like hunting and more like escort. Consent idled at a speed that made water seem lazy. Ambulances used lattice ramps and arrived faster than sirens. A Coast Guard cutter returned 2 Halcyon pilots to their ship. A child on a pier waved a hand-drawn flag with the word equal painted wrong and corrected. In the Detroit plant, the night shift clocked in. In a Halcyon wardroom, a technician drafted a memo that might one day be taught to young stewards. The species at Sol resists by inventing. When denied a seat, they build a table, offer them a seat. The war had not ended. The doctrine had not conceded. The galaxy had not yet listened. But a new architecture had appeared in the air between a ship and a shore, a beam that carried not heat or pressure but a condition. It felt, to those who chose hope, like scaffolding for a better building. The ceasefire arrived like a held breath shared across 2 throats. It wasn't papered by diplomats or inked by seals. It was a shape carved by exhaustion and the ugly mercy of stalemate. Halcyon ships lifted higher. Human rescue craft combed the water for pilots of both species. The Lighthouse Group pushed an update to Phoenix that throttled every aggressive subroutine unless a civilian grid fell below a threshold. It felt, to the engineers who wrote it, like putting teeth on a leash and then putting the leash in the hands of the neighborhood. On the south lawn, brown at the edges from too many helicopters, Maya stood before microphones that reflected a bright and nosy sun. "We have 3 obligations," she said. "To protect life, to tell the truth in public, and to make sure the tools we build can be turned off by the people they affect. That last part is non-negotiable." She cited the Federalist Papers, the Civil Rights Movement, a short history of American shame and repair, and a longer one of American argument. "Our legitimacy comes from consent. We will treat the galaxy the way we insist on treating ourselves." Inside the Oval, the president listened to advisors weigh the cost of magnanimity. "They hit our capitals," one said. "We owe them a crater." "We owe our grandchildren a world with fewer craters," the president answered. "Set the tone." Aaron Cole left the Situation Room to check on a triage ward set up in the old executive office building. He stopped at a bed where a Halcyon lieutenant lay strapped to monitors that were learning a new biology on the fly. "You're safe," he said. The alien's jaw gills fluttered in a rhythm the medics had decided meant yes. Aaron told himself something his mother had told her civics classes. "We are what we do when it's hardest to be what we say." In orbit, Prefect Thalen made a request so old-fashioned it felt rebellious. "I ask leave to apologize." The council's answer was a cord with knives in it. "Proceed if you must. Do not concede doctrine. Doctrine did not fare well against events." A Halcyon splinter, calling themselves correctors, decided the ceasefire was heresy. They launched a surgical admonition at the Phoenix nodes over 3 cities. The word admonition had been selected by people who never had to read condolence letters. In Queens, the beam hit a veil corridor and arced out to sea. A humpback breached through steam that tasted of salt and lesson. In Houston, Keeper's Wing wrote a new diagram in the air and split the attack with a pressure stitch that spared an ICU window and etched a line in an empty lot. In Lagos, consent lifted water into a glittering shield like a cathedral of rain. 3 attacks, 0 funerals, 24 alien correctors escorted, alive into custody they had not planned to experience. On a live feed watched by 1 billion, Thalen faced a camera. "We misnamed stewardship," it said. "We thought it meant holding the wheel for another. It means teaching them to drive and accepting that they will never take your road." Congress convened hearings anyway, as republics should. In room 2154, the Lighthouse Group fielded questions flung like stones and like bouquets. "Are you inventing weapons?" a senator demanded. "We're inventing accountability," Omar Patel said. "Weapons are what people make when they skip that step." Meyer added, "Dual use is not a curse. It's a warning label we design for publics, not princes." An admiral testified in dress whites and a face carved by too many dawns. "Our pilots were ordered to disable and rescue. Some of them would have found it easier to destroy. They did not. They came home heavier and finer men and women for it." A mother from Detroit raised her hand at the back. "I weld on consent," she said. My kid asked if I'm making a gun. I told him no. I said I'm making a promise in metal. The hearings birthed the Covenant of Use, a public charter nobody could opt out of without saying so out loud. Its pillars sounded like a civics class had held office hours with an engineering lab, transparent audit trails, kill switches held by civilian boards, proportionality as a design constraint, no proprietary choke points for life-critical systems, the right to refuse adoption, the right to inspect. Cities voted to ratify. So did unions, universities, co-ops, and 3 different groups of teenagers who showed up with clipboards and clearer eyes than anyone expected. The document was not perfect. It felt alive. Good laws do. Halcyon moderates began whispering words they'd once dismissed as folk magic: consent, audit, appeal. Hardliners pushed back with the old repertoire, fear masked as prudence. In that friction, something useful warmed. The council rehearsed a doctrine escalation called silent rebuke, an atmospheric pulse designed to freeze industry without mass death. It was a policy that accepted misery as pedagogy. Thalen argued against it in language that remembered what it felt like to be young and proud and wrong in public. They have shown restraint with terrifying power. If we meet restraint with punishment, we will teach only that we fear what asks us to share authority. Authority cannot be shared, a counselor sang. It can only be lost. Not if we redefine it, Thalen said. Not if we trade temples for town squares. While councils argued, the Lighthouse Group prepared a mission some called naive and others called inevitable. Ambassador Reyes, Maya tried not to flinch at the title, would lead a delegation to the Assembly's capital world. They would go in ships built from gifts returned as lessons. They would carry not only weapons held in their scabbards, but also the Covenant of Use, printed in Halcyon and 3 other Assembly tongues, with blank lines for signatures and margins for amendments. Keeper walked the flight line under a sky that had learned to keep secrets kindly. You'll have escort, Aaron said. You'll have a veto. You'll have a nation praying in different ways for the same outcome. What do you have? Keeper asked. A classroom waiting, he said, surprising himself. When this is over, I'm going to teach kids how to argue better than we fought. May it always be a competition, Keeper said, and they laughed like people who had earned the right. The mission's flagship lifted from the lake at dawn. On its flank, under the word consent, a second word had been painted by a crew that liked to joke with destiny. Welcome. The ship turned, took the slope of air like a staircase, and climbed toward a meeting as old as ships. Behind it, the planet kept doing the ordinary things that proved the point of extraordinary ones. Markets opened. Caregivers clocked in. A mechanic tightened a bolt on a school bus and hummed the national anthem off-key. A civics teacher handed out printouts of the Covenant of Use and said, "Underline the parts you'll defend when nobody's clapping." Above the blue, the convoy threaded a lane keeper had scouted with the respect of a good thief. "Do not be first to strike," the president had ordered. "Be first to comfort. Be impossible to ignore." Impossible did not take long. The assembly capital was a world of very careful gardens. Geometry did the gardening. Plazas in chords, avenues in ratios that soothed the eye and persuaded the feet to keep their manners. Consent's hull reflected those gardens and refused to be embarrassed by its industrial seams. 1,000 cameras tracked its approach. 10,000 opinions sprinted ahead of its shadow. Remember, Maya told the delegation, we are not here to humiliate. We're here to rearrange the room so it has more chairs. The reception hall was a temple to symmetry. Prefect Thalen waited at the far end with a staff of aides who looked like they had been sculpted from consideration. The council occupied a dais beneath an arch whose proportions agreed with themselves. United Earth, the speaker intoned, we welcome you to the assembly. Thank you for receiving us, Maya said, wired to a translator that mixed Halcyon vowels with a little Bronx. We come with a proposal and a warning. The proposal is a partnership of equals. The warning is what happens to hierarchies that confuse stewardship with custody. A murmur like wind in cut crystal swept the hall. Maya held up a thin folio. The covenant of use, she said. It's a machine for sharing power. It has screws you can adjust. It has brakes. It has mirrors. You bring us a constitution, a counselor asked, trying not to sneer at the impropriety of portable law. A way to say no safely and yes with conditions, Meyer answered. A way to stop a beam before it becomes a habit. Habits are culture, another counselor said, and culture is our jurisdiction. Culture is people, Maya replied. Jurisdictions that forget that end up policing sculptures. While they argued nouns, the outer systems remembered verbs. A Confederation convoy at the married gate signaled distress. Pirates, an old misnomer for reactionaries with math, had anchored a web across the load lane and begun charging tolls in blood. They had assumed the assembly was too busy performing concern to perform defense. Consent altered course without waiting for a polite rag to wave. We cannot intervene in assembly space, a functionary protested over the link. We're not intervening, Consent's captain said. We're tutoring. The pirate web was a net of gravity tricks and kinetic punctuation. Human crews had made a religion of knots for as long as there had been boats. Omar Patel, patched in from Austin, watched the sensor feed and grinned the guilty grin of a man who had brought homework to a date. Thread the lattice like a bowline, he told the helmsman. Simple, fast, teaches when done wrong. The veil unfurled in a spiral that whispered to momentum. Not there here. The web blinked, discovered that physics could be hospitable on a schedule, and sagged into an engineered soft spot where it could be cut without snapping back to hurt bystanders. Consent's pressure stitch tapped 3 pirate anchors into amnesia. Keeper's squadron played tag with interceptors and left every cockpit intact and every engine asleep. On the convoy freighter St. Josephine, a name painted by someone's grandparent who knew the weight of mercy, the captain watched incoming trajectories shift from appetite to etiquette. She keyed the wideband. To the unknown unit clearing our door, if you're selling something, I'll buy coffee and a handshake. Selling a normative framework, Consent's comms officer answered deadpan. First one's free. The pirate leader tried a broadside built from bad childhoods and worse mentors. Consent caught it, sent it into a pocket of structured emptiness, and played it back at 1/10 speed with captions. This is cruelty. Please watch in slow motion. The leader cut engines and stared at the message as a man might stare at a mirror that shows regret like a bruise. Halcyon patrol boats arrived, weapons hot. Consent hailed them first. Lethal force unnecessary, evidence forwarded. We also brought a form. A form? The patrol commander asked. An option for prosecuted combatants to enter restorative labor, the comms officer said. It's not penance if it doesn't build. In the assembly hall, the council's screens filled with feeds that made their doctrine look like a thesis from a century ago. Halcyon public squares, fountains, benches, the gentle insistence of safe design, sprouted handmade signs, share the switch. No protection without election, partners, not parents. Thalen watched and understood the risk, a principle more contagious than fear. The council tried one last old move, expertise as gate. Your covenant has no place in our charter, a senior steward said. We have layered safeguards. So did our banks before the crash, Maya said. So did our hospitals before a virus. Safeguards layered without sunlight become traps. Open it up. What you propose is anarchy, someone hissed. It's federalism with better error handling. Maya replied, and half the translators skipped the joke while the other half, learning, tried it on for size. They recessed. Consent anchored in orbit above a city that had never expected to be peer to something from the blue world. Keeper walked a market where fruit smelled like the geometry that had raised it. People stared. Children did the universal thing and waved. Equal? One asked, practicing the syllables. Equal, equal, Keeper said. It feels bigger when you say it together. On a ridge beyond the city, a cohort of Halcyon cadets trained in maneuvers etched into their bones. A young officer watched the human craft hang at an angle that disrespected every diagram and felt a hunger that wasn't war. Could we learn? She asked her instructor. If they will teach, the instructor said. They will, Thalen said quietly, surprising them both. They cannot seem not to. That night Maya wrote notes for a talk she had not yet been invited to give. Title, Dangerous Gifts and Democratic Hands. Epigraph, a line from Douglas that had carried her since grad school, Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. She added a second line, her own this time. Power kept his power that must be held accountable. Back on Earth, a civics teacher printed the covenant of use on card stock and laminated it with care that would make any law jealous. Her students highlighted the clause about kill switches in public hands and circled the paragraph on restorative labor. We're going to send a copy off-world, she said. Address line 1, everyone. The assembly's morning came early. It brought weather and votes. Silent rebuke needed a sky. It required the world to be a classroom where lessons could take the form of hunger. The council faction that still believed in paternal punishments argued that Earth had to be taught to slow down to accept the pace of guardian patience. We will stall their jet streams, numb their grids, said a counselor whose voice had given orders for a century. No mass death, only humility. Humility is not what you teach with a clenched jaw. Satellites blinked awake to paths they did not request. In the upper atmosphere, halcyon drones began knitting a cool veil over North America and parts of Eurasia. The first effect was subtle, a line of clouds that stayed when they should have drifted, a whisper in the ears of power plants. The second effect was not. Ice in Iowa in June, brownouts shivering across Atlanta, a hospital in Little Rock asking a generator to be a saint. Phoenix saw it, spoke to the grid like a parent waking a teenager gently and then with urgency. Microcells cut in. Neighborhood batteries hummed. The Veil network persuaded gusts to behave like cables. Something new donned an old name, Warm Front. It wasn't meteorology so much as apology written in air. Consent aborted a maneuver in the Assembly's orbit and punched for home alongside halcyon moderates who had decided, finally, that the doctrine would kill what it had sworn to keep. Prefect Thalen took a risk that would be taught later as either brilliance or treason. It uplinked internal council command hashes to the Lighthouse group. If you break them, it said, voice raw, break them gently. Institutions must be rebuilt, not replaced. In a converted Detroit plant, welders paused to watch a weather map glow with intention, then went back to their seams because the future still needed someone to fasten it. In a church basement in Queens, a nurse taped signs over extension cords. One per patient. She told a child it would be okay, then she made it okay. Aaron Cole stood in a grid control room where the clock read 4 minutes to something nobody wanted. We're going to do civics on the sky, he said, and it wasn't bravado. It was the math of will. The Lighthouse group pushed Warmth Lattice 1, 0, a planet-scale choreography of building HVAC bus depots, server farms, stadium roofs, and household water heaters, anything that could be a radiator or a sponge. The city became a body, the body became a choir, and the choir sang heat where cold had been hammered. The jet stream frowned and relented a hair. Keeper climbed into air thin as argument and flew a pattern that made weather very slightly ashamed of itself. The Veil stitched thermals into blankets. The Lattice scolded a cold front with a loving hand. On ARPA-clad screens across the country, lines that had begun to curl into a cruel joke straightened like a promise. In the council chamber, the vote hung at a knife's balance. The transmission wall lit with feeds from Earth. Not riots, not supplication, but neighbors doing the thing that had unnerved empires for centuries, self-government at scale. A union hall distributing warmth budgets. A synagogue hosting a daycare so nurses could work. A co-op kitchen labeling soups by sodium content. The camera in a hospital panned across a NICU crib warmed by a halcyon cell and a crocheted blanket with the word equal sewn crooked on purpose by a grandmother with arthritic hands and unbent opinions. Thalen faced the chamber. We can be stewards who share, it said, or stewards who punish. The first will change us. The second will break them and then change us into the kind of people who prefer broken neighbors. Fear is wisdom, a hardliner offered. Fear is information, Thalen replied. Wisdom is what you do with it. The vote shifted, not by a landslide, by the exact size of a species deciding to love its job more than its pride. Silent rebuke was rescinded. A new docket item blinked onto the agenda, amend charter, consent clause. Keeper escorted a Halcyon task group as it navigated a dissolving order. Hardliners rolling up assets, correctors slinking into secrecy, moderates blinking at the sudden brightness of accountability. At the gate, a flotilla loyal to the old way stacked into a threat. Consent hailed them. "We will not fire first," the captain said, "but we will not let you harm civilians. Please do the math." They did not do the math. Keeper exhaled and wrote on the air with her veins. Pressure stitches laced engines to silence. Veils diverted shots into sacks designed for shame and safety. When a cruiser threatened to ram an evacuation ferry, Consent made a corridor and filled it with a physical principle named after a person who had loved wind. The cruiser skated into compliance like a bully being delivered to a principal's office by the physics lab. Back in the chamber, Meyer and Thalen stood side by side, as if posing for the least likely painting in two histories. Consent clause text scrolled. It read less like poetry and more like plumbing. That was the point. It put kill switches in public hands, audits on stewards, and sunset dates on emergency powers. It required that any protective action be accompanied by an invitation to vote. It banned punishment disguised as weather. "Who will enforce this?" a counselor asked. "The people affected by it," Maya said, "and their neighbors." "Neighbors are sentimental units," someone muttered. "Neighbors are how empires learn manners," Meyer answered. The vote passed. Assembly staffers who had trained their whole lives to make rulebooks neat began scribbling edits that would add a new chapter. Partners. Prefect Thalen sent a private message to the Aerith wherever they had gone and wrote a sentence that would make sense to them if they still cared about lessons. We stepped away from the parents' chair. On Earth, the warmth lattice spun down. Children stomped puddles in June rain that had remembered it was allowed to be ordinary. A civics teacher erased emergency from the board and wrote homework. List 3 things you can shut off in your life to give someone else power when they need it. In a market stall on the assembly world, a vendor taped a sign. New, human recipes for sharing. At Sky School, Aaron handed diplomas to pilots who had learned to disobey gravity as if they had been raised to it. "Remember," he told them, "we didn't win by being meaner. We won by being harder to scare and easier to live next to." The galaxy leaned in, equal parts suspicious and hungry. Suspicion keeps you alive. Hunger makes you interesting. The assembly adjourned. The work began. No one threw a parade big enough. Parades are for concluding chapters. This was a prologue to something untidy and good. The Halcyon Assembly retired titles that smelled of paternal perfume. Prefect, steward, and replaced them with verbs. Facilitate, audit, repair. Their ships painted over heraldry with QR codes that linked to budget spreadsheets. It looked ridiculous and holy. Consent and her sisters became a new kind of embassy, hulls that carried not just emissaries but workshops. The Lighthouse Group spun out the Civic Engineers Corps, half Peace Corps, half Labor Union, all homework. Their assignment template fit on one page. Protect life, build redundancy, leave the switch behind. A circuit of worlds that had quietly hated the assembly's tone opened their gates, not to kneel but to talk. Teaching looked like potlucks and pressure stitches. Trade looked like swapping recipes for warmth. At the married gate, pirates who had chosen restorative labor, cruelty interrupted by an invitation, poured concrete for a new lane station and learned to like the ache. A former corrector supervised, and the first time a beam cut wrong, pushed the kill switch himself. "We fix," he said, and nobody laughed. Keeper flew escort on routes that had once been patrols. In a quiet moment above a green world whose rivers drew calligraphy, she read a letter from a child in Detroit who had watched her jet carve impossible parentheses in a hard sky. "Dear Pilot," the letter began in sharp pencil. My grandma says what you did was mercy fast. Keeper folded the page into her suit pocket like a spare organ. Aaron Cole asked for a transfer and got it. He took a classroom with more desks than chairs and a view of a field where kids ran drills that looked suspiciously like play. Syllabus: argument, repair, portable ethics. Lab: build a tiny grid that refuses to fail silently. Final: teach your parents something about power they don't already know. He graded softly and strictly, like a man who had almost lost a country and found it by watching it keep its promises to strangers. Maya wrote what the press insisted on calling a book, and she insisted on calling a manual, Dangerous Gifts, a user's guide for democracies. It sold well enough that strangers sent her pictures of dog-eared copies on kitchen tables. The first chapter was a story about a broom and a cinder block and a woman who learned, too late and then just in time, that tools teach us what we're capable of. The last chapter was an invitation. List the switches in your life and put 2 names next to each, the person responsible and the person authorized to say no. She dedicated the book to the Lighthouse Group, to Thalen, and to a civics teacher whose laminated copy of the Covenant of Use had become a family heirloom. Thalen returned to Earth without an escort beyond good sense. It stood on a pier where consent's paint chipped in weather and watched teenagers argue about zoning with more heat than malice. "You are loud," it said. "We are verbs," the civics teacher said. "Nouns rust." A veteran with a sleeve that told stories in ink asked Thalen a rude question the way Americans sometimes do when they're trying to make friends. "You still think we're children?" Thalen looked at the skyline, which had learned to share itself with a ship in the sky. "Children do not hold us to account," it said. "You do." In a corner of the Assembly archives, a junior clerk filed the consent clause and made a note in the margin. "Enforcement depends on attention. Attention depends on neighbors." She underlined neighbors twice and went to lunch with a human engineer who taught her how to make a sandwich dangerously well. The galaxy learned new phrases. "Do you have a kill switch?" became as common as "where's the bathroom?" "Show me your audit got you a discount." Protected member left the language like a bad smell finally chased by a window. There were still wars. Pirates who preferred the old mathematics sharpened their knives. Hardliners tried to rebrand punishment as pedagogy with fonts that fooled fewer people. Humans stumbled in public, as is our habit, and got up with bruises that taught better than applause. A hospital in Manila built its power budget like a prayer. A school in Kansas City wrote the consent clause into its student council bylaws. A repair ship with a halcyon crew and a human cook pulled a broken freighter out of a spin and fed everyone soup that tasted of tomatoes and amends. On a hill in Arlington, a new stone joined older stones. Its inscription was short: "We made ourselves harder to scare." Flowers collected there the way gratitude collects where strangers have made rooms for you to breathe. Keeper landed her craft on a day when the air had that honest weight that means storms later. And later is fine. She walked to the hangar, peeled off the suit that had learned her shape, and found Aaron waiting with a box of chalk. "You're late," he said. "For class?" she asked. "For showing off," he said, and opened the box. On the hangar floor, they drew arcs and stitched vectors and let a dozen teenagers throw questions like paper airplanes. Keeper showed them how to bend a line without breaking a rule. Aaron showed them why the kill switch belongs to the many. A kid in the front row raised a hand. "What do we do if someone stronger says they're protecting us and won't let go?" "You build a neighbor," Keeper said. "You build a switch," Aaron added. "You build a ship," Maya said from the doorway, smiling as if history had just delivered coffee. Night came to a planet that had learned a new grammar for power. Streetlights hummed. Windows threw rectangles onto sidewalks. In Central Park, the contact house had been renovated into something stubbornly municipal. A library with a workshop where anyone could learn to solder or sew or draft a public comment. The plaque out front did not mention conquest. It said, "This building belongs to the people who walk past IT." Above, consent held a quiet orbit. Its crew watched thunderstorms prowl and blinked like sailors since sailors learned to blink at weather. In its belly, tools slept with switches in reach of hands that would not always agree on when to use them. That was the point. That was the promise. Far away in a city of careful gardens, the assembly hosted a class titled Stewardship After Pride. Thalen taught. The first slide was a picture of a broom and a cinder block. The second was a scan of the Covenant of Use with 1,000 fingerprints smudged into the margins. The third was a photo of a grandmother's crooked embroidery. Equal, the letters big and not quite straight and therefore perfect. The last thing the galaxy saw that day, if anyone had been looking in the right place with the right patience, was a ship crossing a boundary not present in any physics but enforced in many hearts. It did not ask permission to be kind. It did not require a doctrine to be decent. It moved like a sentence finishing itself, not with a period but with the kind of ellipsis that says, "Come with me, there's more to do." And there was, and we were equal to it.